thank you all for being here. I don't take it for granted for a minute who's here. Not everybody devotes themselves to the environment, to the sustainability, to the future of our planet, although everyone should. And I know a lot of you are committed to that, and I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And a lot of you also support the Hunger Project, and I really appreciate that. We've had the freedom to do what we do because we're supported by wonderfully generous individuals who are really committed to the kinds of breakthroughs that are going to be required. I've called tonight the front line of sustainability. In the quest for social, economic, environmental sustainability, all of us have a job to do. And yet, we've kind of in our society being conditioned to think of the real cutting edge is on Wall Street, or the real cutting edge is in Washington. But from my perspective, where the future of humanity is being worked out isn't any of those places. It's in the impoverished villages of the developing world. Issues like environmental sustainability, sustainable agriculture, food production, health issues, population, climate change are being worked out by some of the poorest people on our planet. These people are not necessarily the problem, but if there's going to be a solution, they need to be the solution. And what I hope to introduce you to is some of the heroes of that solution and some of the methodologies that are working to empower our sisters and brothers on the front line of sustainability to be successful. Tonight is dedicated to two of these heroes. Many of you have heard of the Nobel Prize winner, Wangari Maathai. From about the time I joined the Hunger Project, she was advising the Hunger Project. She knew early on the close link between impoverished people, and particularly poor women, and the preservation of the environment. And she empowered more than 50,000 women to plant something like 50 million trees and fought for their rights until her recent untimely passing. She was one of the first winners of our prize, the Africa Prize for Leadership, and credits that prize with giving her a platform from which she was able to do work that caught the attention of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. And also one of our founders, Dana Meadows, who wrote a very famous book, The Limits of Growth, one of the first big applications of systems thinking. And I know that everyone involved with the environment has a deep appreciation for the fact that these are systems issues. None of the issues facing humanity exist in isolation. They are part of a complex system, and Dana really was one of the people who put that on the map and then brought her energies to get the Hunger Project started when it started and was served on our board for many years. I want to talk to you about agroecology and what you can do, and then we should have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions and answers. Now, probably not most of you, but most of our fellow Americans and fellow people in the developed world, when we say the word world hunger, we all have a certain image in mind that's been mostly planted there by the media. And what's that image? Anyone can play. Starving children waiting in lines for bowls of gruel. That does tragically still happen, but that accounts for less than 8% of the hunger-related deaths in our world. 92% of those deaths are from chronic, persistent hunger, which looks like this. A young woman, a mother with her baby on her back, pregnant with her second, probably 15 or 16 years old. She's never had a chance to go to school. She's never had a chance to see a doctor. She's growing all the food her family eats using tools that haven't been improved for more than 1,000 years. She's been pushed onto marginal land by urbanization. And one of the most important things about her is that she is a food farmer. So the vast majority of people in our world who are hungry are themselves food farmers. So the impulse to send over food is exactly counterproductive, because that will lower the price for her to earn for whatever surplus she can produce. So you really have to ask yourself, what institutions need to be built around her so that she can be a successful small-scale farmer? That's the central issue of the sustainable end of hunger. In 1992, there was the Earth Summit, one of the biggest international conferences on the environment. The first principle established at that conference was that human beings are at the center of concern for sustainable development. They are entitled to a healthy and productive life in harmony with nature. And that is, in short, a short way to describe the system that we're talking about. Then in the year 2000, at the launch of this millennium, the largest gathering of world leaders ever assembled and created a set of goals, measurable goals called the Millennium Development Goals, of which the interconnectedness of all aspects of poverty and sustainability of the environment were pulled together in an integrated way for the first time. Poverty, education, gender equality, child health, maternal health, combating the big diseases, the environment, and improving our global partnership. All of those were seen as a holistic unit known as the MDGs. And so when you ask, what does ending hunger mean? It really means solving all of these problems together. There's nobody on whom the environment is more important than that woman in the field. Her livelihood is directly a function of her connection with her natural environment. In addition, much of the ancient wisdom that humanity has on sustainable forestry and sustainable agriculture resides in traditions that have been passed on often by the women of these traditional communities. And yet their voice has often been denied. And policies are set, they're set in the capitals by old men, not by the women who know the problem. The scale of the problem, there are approximately 925 million people living in conditions of chronic hunger. We usually think of hunger in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, but that's only a quarter of the hunger in the world. Way more than half of the hunger in the world is in South Asia, particularly India. We think of India now as a thriving economy, yet it has the largest number of hungry people in our world. Progress has been made. If you look through the 70s and 80s, the proportion of the world population living in hunger has been going down, but it has kind of bottomed out. We've kind of solved the easiest part of the problem, and the hardest part still has to be resolved, and that's what we've been working on. This is a picture of us working on the problem. Solving world hunger is like climbing a mountain in the fog. You know where you want to get. You've glimpsed the summit, but there's fog all around, and at best you can make your way to the next plateau. And you hope that when you get to that plateau, you'll have a better view and you can get to the next plateau. So this approach is called a strategic organization or a learning organization. And over the next few minutes, I want to discuss 6 lessons that the Hunger Project has learned, and often the hard way, climbing up this mountain. Okay, the first lesson that we've learned is what we call mobilization. People, it's true, are wise, they're smart, they're intelligent. That woman, day by day, solves more problems than I probably have to face in my lifetime. And she and the poor of this planet have been convinced that they are powerless, that it's hopeless, that there's nothing they can do to improve their lives. That sense of resignation, of dependency, of waiting to be rescued has been deeply ingrained, and there's plenty of evidence to support it. So the first step has to be an awakening of people to the possibility of their taking charge of their own lives. As Gandhi said, to restore people to control over their own life and destiny, to discover that they can do something. We start with a process called a Vision, Commitment, and Action workshop, where people discover their ability to create a vision for their village, discover their ability to actually take action to solve that, and then launch them into action and be sure that they succeed at the first action they take with completely no outside help. And when that happens, there is a state change in those villages. Now, as we do this, we discovered pretty early that in these very patriarchal traditional societies, the men charge ahead with their priorities and the women stay behind. And this, we learned in this study by UNICEF, the mistreatment of women is not just a sad and terrible injustice. It's also the root cause of most of the hunger in the world. Little girls in India, for example, are taught to eat last and least. They're kept out of school to help with the home. They're married off as soon as they reach puberty. They have children before their bodies are fully developed. They are themselves malnourished when they give birth. And actually, half of the child malnutrition occurs in the womb. So addressing that deeply entrenched gender discrimination has to be part of the solution. And we have taken that on big time in the Hunger Project. We have trained hundreds of thousands of women leaders around the world to not only have a voice, but to be organized, to have an organized voice, to be leaders in their villages, and to be key change agents in the process of development. The third thing we learned is what Tip O'Neill tried to teach us. Anybody know what Tip O'Neill once said? Yes, all politics is local. And in fact, studies have shown that the most important issue isn't necessarily the national strategies or the international aid programs, but is your local village council responsive or not? Is it just helping the rich people, or is it responsive to the poor people? Is there anything like real local democracy at work? And so the Hunger Project, everywhere we work, we strengthen the people's ability to hold their own local government to account, and then we actually train the local government to be responsive, to be transparent, that they can look good if their people are unleashed into local voluntary action that's successful. And we find that when those three things come together, mobilization, women as change agents, and local democracy, you've got the pillars upon which you can create successful progress. Now, we started working one village at a time. And with all due respect to our great Secretary of State, she was wrong about one thing. It doesn't take a village. It actually takes a cluster of villages. Traditional villages are too small to have any political power. They have maybe 50 households, 100 households. They're never going to get the attention of their government. But if you can get a cluster that is big enough to manage programs, and yet is small enough so that people know each other, can reach those programs, and can hold their leaders to account, you have a body that can work, that can exert power. You know, if you want a good basketball team, you need a big high school. Same in ending hunger. You need about 5,000, 10,000 people. But you need it to be within walking distance because the poor walk. So a 10-kilometer radius, 6-mile radius, half a dozen villages, then you've got a unit that can solve their own problems. The next thing we learned is that single interventions, no matter how brilliant, are never sustainable. Take microcredit. A lot of people have done standalone microcredit programs. They're wonderful, they help people, but in the rural areas, they never become sustainable. And a lot of it has to do with what is life like for women. I mean, women carry many, many burdens, and if you're not addressing them all, you're making one of the other burdens worse. So as women gain more voice and that can demand better health and nutrition, that leads to they and their kids having better education, better incomes. That gives the women more social power, more inclusion, and you start to get if you address all of these issues, you start to get a spiral that goes up. We do this across Africa. We had to invent our own village cluster system. We call them epicenters. People, through their voluntary energies, build this magnificent structure that has a food bank, a microfinance facility, everything they need to meet their basic needs. So this is our theory of change. You mobilize people for self-reliance. You empower women to be key change agents. You strengthen local democracy and forge a partnership with the people. You get people working on everything. So you get a health committee, an education committee, a nutrition committee, food security committee, microfinance committee, all at once, and you simmer for 5 to 8 years. And then you can sustainably achieve the Millennium Development Goals. And we're doing this in about 35,000 villages around the world. The sixth lesson, and this is for us Westerners a really tough lesson, is that this does not take place in a New York minute. It doesn't even take place where I grew up, a St. Louis hour. This takes time, and it's village time. And so patience to really follow it step by step, building on success, building on strength, is absolutely critical in this process. People have to own their own development. And just like going through school, you can't jump ahead or you lose everyone. So this takes patience, and as Jim was saying earlier today, a lot of people have been patiently and steadfastly supporting this work, supporting the center, supporting things like this, and steadfastness really pays off. We're doing this in 3 states of Mexico, Chiapas and Oaxaca, the 2 poorest states of Mexico, and Zacatecas. We're doing this in all 37 indigenous language groups of Peru. This is leaders from all those tribes holding their own climate change conference. Nobody cares more about climate change than the people living in the Amazon and in the Andes, where it is already hitting very, very hard. As I mentioned, 115 epicenters involving more than 3,000 villages across 8 countries of Africa. 630 clusters of villages in Bangladesh. They're called union parishads. 7,000 clusters of villages in India called panchayats. And this has a population of about 35 million people. And we're not content. We want it all 925 million people. And so we're pushing on governments everywhere to support that happening. Okay, part 3, agroecology. Small-scale farmers are not the problem. they are the solution. If you only buy one book this year, buy this one, the 2011 State of the World Report, written by a young woman named Danielle Nierenberg. She traveled to 25 countries across Africa, interviewing small-scale farmers who had innovated ways to not only grow food sustainably, but repair the environment in doing so, to capture carbon and take it out of the atmosphere, to reduce or eliminate use of fertilizers, to truly solve the problems acre by acre. And it turns out that's the best way to do it. Farming in a way that's sustainable requires tailoring your methods to every quarter acre. And that can best be done by the people who are living there. So the small-scale farmers are the ones who are hungry. They're the ones who need empowerment to end their own hunger. And when it's empowered to do it ecologically, they can also be the solution to climate change, to environmental sustainability. This is an area where we worked in India, where the soil had been completely destroyed by the salt from the tsunami. You know, we all saw on our television screens how the tsunami killed lots and lots of fishermen, and that was tragic. But the poorest people, and the people whose devastation was even more lasting, were the farmers. Their soils were covered with salt water. But this is just 8 months later, out of training and empowering these people to remove salt from their fields. This was their first crop, and it was already up at 50% of pre-tsunami yields. Tree plantation, sustainable woodlots, is a key strategy, not only to save the forests and expand the forests, but also to reduce drudgery of women who've had to spend 3 or 4 hours a day searching for firewood. Planting trees amongst your farm crops is a great strategy to have farms that actually capture carbon and grow sustainably. To have fruit trees and other crops growing side by side is a great, great strategy. Drip irrigation, another labor-intensive but wonderful solution to growing crops in what to us look like the stinking desert. This is the Sahel in Senegal. It's extremely parched, extremely dry. The roof of the epicenter building is a natural system for water harvesting. You capture all the rainwater in cisterns, and then you pump it out through little tubes and grow crops. We've had a lot of luck in composting. This is in Ethiopia, where people have learned to compost. Not only is it better ecologically, but they would never be able to afford chemical fertilizer. So this is a great solution for people to move out of poverty. Now, some areas like Burkina Faso, where this is in the heart of the Sahelian desert in Africa, you really have to use some fertilizer. The ground has just been stripped of its nutrients. So they've come up with a system called microdose fertilizer, where you literally put tiny amounts of fertilizer right into the seed hole. It uses dramatically less fertilizer, less greenhouse gases into the air, and yet here's the side of the field without it, and here's the side of the field with it. You still get dramatic increases in food production. Zero-emission vehicles. This is at one of the epicenters in Malawi. They are really innovative. One of the great aspects of the epicenter strategy is that it has medical care available 24/7 in the rural areas. Nurse midwives who live in little houses right behind the epicenter, they're there 24/7. And guess what these are? Ambulances, exactly. So that when women go into labor, they can be safely brought to the epicenter And maternal mortality has essentially vanished from the areas where we have our epicenters. Reproductive health services. What are these people learning about? And these are the less graphic demonstrations. They carve these things with great relish. They also demonstrate female condoms, which is even more dramatic. The biggest killer of malnourished children is waterborne disease. So an enormous environmental push for clean water and sanitation and hygiene. By the way, anyone know what the most important medical discovery ever was? Soap. Exactly. Hand washing. Hand washing it has saved more lives than anything. So this is a women's business mobilized by Hunger Project volunteers, where the women construct the elements for safe sanitation, and the villages where we work hold 100% safe sanitation campaigns, and that saves millions of lives. By the way, this Saturday, mark your calendar, is World Toilet Day. You can be flushed with pride. Kids are having buttons on campus. Give a crap for sanitation. I mean, this is important stuff for our world. These brilliant, resourceful problem solvers are facing a huge problem in climate change, and with these are illiterate people. They are not had access to education. We've conducted, in partnership with the Environmental Defense Fund, a training for women leaders in India to be able to be leaders for climate change adaptation, how to do it. We have a wonderful Bollywood blockbuster movie that we produced. It's on our website with English subtitles that follows a village through just the ravages of desertification to being green and thriving again, thanks to great women leaders, and I encourage you to watch it on our website. So this is what we're achieving, a real synergy, a real systematic approach to empowering people to meet all their basic needs. And at the center of all this is nutrition. Nutrition isn't just a program. You can't actually do it as a program. You have to have enough money to buy enough food. You have to have clean water, or no matter how much you'll eat, you'll lose it due to diarrheal diseases. You have to have access to health care. Deworming of children is an incredible part of nutrition. Nutrition education, because when people are malnourished, they don't feel it, actually. They don't see it. They don't know the facts. We're launching a big campaign. It's called the 1,000 Days campaign, in partnership with other organizations around the world, to really educate everyone that the time from conception to a child's second birthday, the mother's nutrition and the child's nutrition is absolutely essential, because developmental damage during that period is irrevocable. If you're 3 and you're hungry, you can actually repair that. If you're 1 and you're hungry, you can't repair that. And as we said, half of the developmental potential, half of the childhood malnutrition is lost in the womb. So to have every girl, boy, man, woman know that during pregnancy, the mother must have 1 more meal a day. During nursing, she must have 2 more meals a day. She should exclusively breastfeed for at least 6 months, and then have complementary food with breastfeeding to the age of 2. You do things like that, and you can have healthy, chubby little babies like this one. So, what you can do. When you and I visit the villages, we're not the ones who are giving, we're the ones who are given to. So I've chosen educative pictures from the villages where we work. So one thing we all must do is learn more. There is a lot on this center's website, there's a lot on our website to understand these issues deeply, how they interconnect. I mean, once you get the interconnection, it makes sense, but it's not the kinds of things a lot of us have learned. Second, invest in what works. Take your money and invest in those people who are on the front lines. With the Hunger Project, with Oxfam, with Helen Keller Institute, there are a lot of good groups. And I'll tell you, during this recession, they are struggling to keep going. I mean, the great group CARE has just laid off people. And this is not good news. So support those things that work. Option number 3, change your whole life. This young woman, Hannah Salwan, at the age of 14, as many 14-year-olds do, discovered social injustice. And she was really angry about it and really determined that her family would really do something. And they were already pretty philanthropic. They were on the board of Habitat, and they were doing great stuff. And her mom said, well, Hannah, how committed to this are you? I mean, we don't really have cash. We have this nice big house. Do you want to sell this house? That would give us enough money to really make a difference. And she said, yes, let's do that. So they sold their house. They bought a smaller house. It was so radical that they got a book deal out of it, and Power of Half, another book to buy. And they were one of the inspirations for the Gateses to set up the Billionaire Project. And they have underwritten 40 villages, 2 epicenters in Africa to take the entire journey from poverty to self-reliance, this one family. So people can do bold, creative things. And, I can't recommend it enough. Advocate for better policies. These young women are advocating for equal rights for women in Bangladesh. There are a lot of policies that need to be changed. There are a lot of things that all of our governments around the world do that hurt, and there are things they do that help. And we need to stop doing so much harm, and we can do a lot more good. In the 4-hour version, we could have listed some of those. Rally others to join you. This is a picture Jim Whitten took. Here's his darling wife visiting the first ever National Girl Child Day in Bangladesh, where our Bangladeshi colleagues invite hundreds of thousands of people to rally with them. But around you are people, you're conscious people, and the people around you know that. They look to you, truly they look to you for kind of hints on how they ought to be living. So don't keep your light under a bushel, like the song says, let it shine. This is a tough one. Sustain your enthusiasm. It is really easy in this world and in this media environment we live in to get depressed. And I tell you, the world can't afford for you to do that. We really need to keep ourselves up for this. It's easy for me because I get to travel and see people like our volunteer teacher in the Ato Bikram epicenter in the eastern region of Ghana. People are doing inspiring things around the world. There's extraordinary access to those inspiring things. There are TED Talks, there's websites, there's a lot to sustain you. For me, it's important for me, and I hope for you, to recognize that we are at an historic moment. History is being made. Hundreds of millions of people are moving out of poverty. Women who've been denied their rights for generations are finding their voice and standing up for those rights. dozens of men are standing with them. I mean, it's a truly historic time in human history. Martin Luther King said, and this is my favorite quote, "Let us realize the arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend towards justice. Gender justice, social justice, environmental justice. Progress is being made, and what we do bends that arc a little faster towards the commitment to justice that we all stand for." So don't lose heart. We may ourselves not get there, but humanity will get there. And what each of us does matters. Every action. As a riff on this, never think that you're too small to take action. If you think you're too small, remember what it's like to sleep in a room with a mosquito. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that we have time for.